welcome to another installment of Hatfield Currents. For those of you who've been watching the show, as you know, deals with key issues in town, key personalities, key events, and once in a while we do some historical shows. Today's show focuses on one of two legislators who represent Hatfield in the Great and General Court in Boston. Now, some of you may be asking at this point, what the heck does he mean by Great and General Court? So before we get into the show, I want to digress just a little bit, maybe with a little history lesson. The General Court of Massachusetts is the state legislature of the Commonwealth. The name General Court is a holdover from the colonial era, when this body also sat in judgment of judicial appeals cases. Before the adoption of the state constitution in 1780, it was called the Great and General Court of Massachusetts. But the official title was shortened by John Adams, author of the state constitution, apparently in the name of Republican simplicity. The General Court meets in the Massachusetts State House on Beacon Hill in Boston. It is a bicameral body. That means that it consists of two separate and distinct lawmaking assemblies. And the upper house is the Massachusetts Senate, which is composed of 40 members. And the lower body, the Massachusetts House of Representatives, has 160 members. I might get corrected here in a couple of minutes, but nevertheless, that's what my research has told me. So our guest today is one of the 160 representatives to the lower court in Boston, our state representative, Peter Kocot from Northampton. So without further ado, I want to welcome Peter to Hatfield Currents.
Morning, Michael.
Good to see you. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Your schedule is incredibly busy.
It is.
And we very much appreciate your being able to spend an hour or so with us today at Hatfield Currents.
Happy to be here. And actually walking in today, this is being taped on, I believe it's April 1st today or March 31st. I
think it's, yeah. 31st,
and it was snowing and sleeting. And I was talking to one of my friends in Northampton a couple of weeks ago, Jerry Budger, who lives in the Northampton Meadows and has a large garden. Yeah. And I told him that day I was very excited. I had purchased my stakes for my tomatoes and I was getting ready. He says, Peter, don't do it. Don't plant. Don't. And I said, why, Jerry? He goes, because this is New England. And he's a very smart man. So
is it ever New England? And has it ever been New England for the last several months? As unpredictable as New England can be, it's been.
It is. So I'm going to wait, and I'll show up at Skoski Farms here in Hatfield probably right around the last week of May, 1st. And I will purchase my tomato plants and pepper plants from Mr.
I
Mr.
may
Mrs.
very
Skoski.
well see you there.
I'll be there.
First, I think it would be prudent for us to share a little bit of background about Peter. Peter was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 2002, and he represents the communities of Hatfield and Northampton, Southampton, Westhampton, and Montgomery. He currently serves as the House Chairman of the Joint Committee on State Administration and Regulatory Oversight, and he formerly served as the chair of the House Committee on Ethics. And in that capacity, helped rewrite the Commonwealth statutes on ethics, campaign finance, lobbying, and the open meeting law. For those of us who get involved in town public politics and town public positions, we know what that means, the latter of the open meeting law. He has received legislative achievement awards from the Massachusetts Nurses Association, the Municipal Association, the Greater Boston Food Bank, and Common Cause of Massachusetts. He's a graduate of Brown University in Providence, and he graduated with a BA in American Security Policy. And he's married to Shawneen O'Donnell Kocot. They live in Northampton with two sons, Jake and Luke.
Who are almost my size now.
Oh, really?
And when they come home, they burn through about, I don't know how many gallons,
gallons of milk?
Our family farms milk, non-fat milk, produced right here in the valley, gallons a week. So they're not home right now, so we're not drinking as much milk. But
you know, it's interesting you mention that because a couple of shows ago, we had Darrell Williams on, who is the basically the owner-operator of Luther Belden Farms in Hatfield.
Close friend of mine.
Yeah, and I mean, somewhere along the way, I asked Darryl, what's the market for his milk? He didn't say it was the Kocot family, but
well, and actually, I was talking.
Part of it, that's for sure.
A large chunk of it goes towards Florence. I was actually talking with some folks who work at Agrimark, which is a large milk wholesaler and co-op, and they were telling me that there's a huge market now for Greek yogurt, and a lot of the milk from this area is evidently flowing to a plant in New York State because the craze for Greek yogurt has just taken off. So hopefully that'll help raise milk prices.
Darryl mentioned that. Yeah. Well, let's get into some questions for Peter at this point. Peter has a slideshow that we're going to share with everyone in a few minutes. But anything else you want to add about yourself personally and your resume? Did I leave anything out?
Little known fact, I paid for most of my books and expenses the first couple of years at Brown University, picking tobacco here in Hatfield for Myers and Mendelsohn. And worked many, many long hours and learned the value of $1.
Yes,
under those tents, when it was outside, it would be 95. Under those tents, it would be about 120.
195.
And many times I'll be on Hatfield roads and I'll point out that used to be a tobacco field. That was a tobacco field. And I picked that tobacco field many times.
Yeah. Well, you and I have a lot in common because my roots were there as well.
And I also bring just a lot of vegetables produced here in fruits and vegetables produced here in Hatfield down in Boston. Smorosky Farms, asparagus and strawberries. They're very highly sought after in the Boston area on Beacon Hill. Corn and potatoes from Swislowski Farms. So the bounty of this community in this valley is really appreciated on Beacon Hill.
On Beacon Hill, that's great. So you're representing us as in person as well as our vegetables and fruits from the valley are representing us as well. That's great.
I can't bring enough down there.
So let's get into that for a minute. This is a couple of the questions that I have. You've been a rep for 10 years now, and obviously back and forth to Boston now. Every day, is it?
Almost every day. Almost every day. In the next couple of weeks, we're looking at the next fiscal year. I'll be down there every day. Typically, we'll do hearings and caucuses on Tuesdays, sessions on Wednesdays and or Thursdays. I try to limit it to 3 days because I like to be out here to meet with folks. Fridays are usually packed full. My colleagues and I have office hours out here. We have meetings most Fridays. We started yesterday at about 8:30 in Springfield. Ended up last night in Northampton about 5 o'clock. The good thing about being a legislator from Western Massachusetts is that we are a bipartisan group working on behalf of the western part of the state. I compare and contrast our group of legislators, senators, representatives, Democrat. It's nonpartisan in the sense that we're not competing with press releases when a project works out. We work as a team because there's fewer of us, and we have to do that. Yesterday afternoon, Don Humison, who's the legislator from Westfield, hosted all the legislators from the western part of the state at Pomeroy's Farm. We had pancakes, we had homemade maple syrup, and it was a social event. And we enjoy being with each other, we enjoy working with each other, so that's good for the people of Western Massachusetts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's great to see that, all of you get together and break bread together, and I mean, you begin to know each other personally and much better than before, I'm sure, and can talk about common problems and start to look at common solutions. That makes sense.
Well, I actually gave a speech on the House floor 2 weeks ago, and I talked about the fact that as a legislator, you can't just know your district. You've got to know everyone's district and the differences, because public policy questions sometimes, the answer is different in Boston than it is in Hatfield. And so you have to be sensitive to those things.
Right. So how is, you've been doing this for 10 years, how has it changed? Has it changed at all in 10 years? Other than the topic and the subject and whatever the issue of the day is, I mean, has the process at all changed?
I think that the process is pretty similar in terms of what it was back in those first years, 2002. I think the pressure in terms of the financial situation has become more intense. We're going to get into that. The number of options that we have to deal with that set of challenges, has changed over time. The importance of trying to take care of healthcare for everyone, I think that issue has really risen to the top, right below jobs, trying to create jobs. The goal of trying to make every family, every community, and the entire state competitive in the modern world marketplace is more important now than it ever was.
Right.
And I think we're lucky in Massachusetts in that we transitioned from that manufacturing-based economic system to a knowledge-based system many years ago.
Right.
We were ahead of many other states, so that's really helped us.
Yeah, yeah. The technology, we've made that leap into the technology curve, if you will, from the manufacturing side,
right,
from the industrial side, which has helped.
And we have in this valley a couple of niches. Obviously, our major employers, the hospitals, the colleges, but in the Southampton-Westfield area, you have a niche, high-precision manufacturing node or module that is second to none in the entire country. You have a company in Southampton that's currently producing high-tech titanium-tooled parts for aerospace, for NASA, for the cutting-edge military applications, and people are seeking out their work. And that has a ripple effect in the area to other manufacturers as well. So we're very fortunate that we have that locally.
Yeah, 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 that's nice. So, you've been doing it for 10 years. It begs an obvious question: how much longer do you see yourself doing this?
Every day is different, and to me, I love working. It's an honor and a privilege to be the representative from this area. I love my job. I think it's the best job in the world. I love to work with people, and I love to solve problems. And so, as long as that's part of that job, I'm going to keep doing it. As long as the voters of this area want me, I'm going to keep doing it.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, you've been doing a great job, Peter,
Thank you.
And you can certainly see that you do enjoy what you do.
I do.
And it's probably a thankless position from time to time, but nevertheless, I think that on behalf of Hatfield, I want to thank you for all the hard work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
The entire area as well as our community.
I have lots of friends in Hatfield.
I know you do. Yeah. So, what do you want to share with us today? You mentioned a little bit about the biggest challenge the state has is basically a fiscal challenge.
When you look at what we have faced over the last 47 months, we're coming out of 47 months of a national and worldwide economic freefall. You've seen the collapse of some of our largest banks, some of our largest, brokerage houses. You've seen a great mortgage crisis. You've seen sort of a lack of oversight from Washington on these mortgage-backed securities. So what we've been faced with, literally since the year 2002, is trying to come up with creative ways to face this crisis. And we've done it using a wide variety of tools, and let me just summarize a couple of them. Cuts. We've cut every major program that we have. Every major program that we have control over, we have made cuts in. We've consolidated agencies. We've consolidated the Mass Turnpike with Mass Highway. Huge savings there. We've done pension reform, ethics reform, campaign finance reform, lobbying reform. We've done a major municipal health care reform that just this year will save us $100 million. We've tried to creatively use one-time revenues like these stimulus funding and our own stabilization fund. And we've tried to be creative. And when you talk with the large Wall Street bond rating firms, Fitch's, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's, they've looked at our approach and they've said, you've done it the right way. And they've basically looked at us and have upgraded our bond rating. We have a AA+ bond rating from these agencies, in contrast to most states which have seen their bond ratings go down.
Yeah. Yeah.
That enables us to borrow money less expensively. It allows every city and town to borrow money less expensively. And moving forward, what we've tried to do is position companies to expand and grow here in Massachusetts. So what I'd like to share today is an overview of our finances, the trends over the last 5 years or so, and where we are going now. And I have a slide presentation, and we can start that now.
Okay, let's get into that. It should be interesting for those of you who are watching. We'll get a little bit of a view, I believe, of the Massachusetts macro side of things, and then I think Peter's going to have some slides about Hatfield as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about the implications of the state's finances on the community. So,
and Mike, this is a snapshot. You're going to see references to websites that if folks want to get additional information, all that's online. And obviously, if you have any questions, you can contact my office. So let's go.
Good.
First of all, this first slide is a explanation of what our expenditures have looked like over the last 10 years. And if you look at the top blue line, that shows direct local aid. And as you can see, there's been a precipitous drop-off in that type of aid. The second line is, the pink line, is the Medicaid line. And as you can see, that has trended exponentially upward during that time
So
period.
Peter, just to shed some light on this slide, that top line, that purple or blue line, you see the drop in local aid.
Right.
That has an impact on Hatfield, obviously.
Certainly does. But you will see a slide later that shows that, ironically, the local aid to Hatfield has been relatively consistent during that time period.
Okay.
This line shows the overall state aid.
Okay.
This next slide is a slide indicating the revenue sources during that period of time. And the top blue line indicates taxes.
Yeah.
And as you can see, starting in the year 2008, during that fiscal year, you saw a major drop-off indicating the time period coinciding with the mortgage crisis and the Wall Street
Economic collapse.
Economic collapse, correct.
So the time frame for, I don't know how people are seeing this on TV, but the time frame that we're talking about here is 10 years.
Correct.
So if you look way over to the left of these slides, that's the year 2000, 2001, I guess.
Correct.
And we're moving over to the right-hand side of that slide is fiscal 2010 or 11.
That is correct. This next slide is a comparative slide showing the U.S. on the far left, then the states of Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And just for sake of comparison, it deals with the property tax, general sales tax, selective sales, individual income, and other. And if you'll notice the New Hampshire graph, you will see that they have a huge reliance on the property tax.
Right.
Whereas if you look at states such as Connecticut, Maine, and Massachusetts, they tend to rely less on that and more on other taxes such as the individual.
Well, New Hampshire
tax.
doesn't have a sales tax.
No, correct.
So that's why they need to rely on some other tax for
those
revenues,
folks,
and that's property tax.
that's correct. So those folks out there who feel that their local property taxes are extremely high in the state, compare that to New Hampshire where they're obviously much higher.
Right. Right.
This slide shows the 2010 budgeted funds and expenditures by major programs. If you look at the purple slice of that pie, that's Medicaid. If you look at the off-white slice next to it, that's other health and human services programs. This pie chart clearly shows that Medicaid and healthcare consume a huge portion of our state budget.
Huge.
This is 2010 revenues and other financing sources. The light blue large pie slice at the top is taxes. The one to its right in purple is federal reimbursements. So as you can see, most of our revenues come from taxes collected here in the state. This chart, which is a little bit hard to read, just shows the trending.
This is for all those of you who are at home are looking at this chart, this is the eye test chart.
This is the Representative Pete Kocot eye test for Hatfield. What this shows, however, is that over the last at least 9 fiscal years, local aid to Hatfield, other than a very large drop in the years 2004 and 2005, has trended upward and now is trending towards the $1.4 million amount. Now I'd like to present a portion of a PowerPoint presentation from the Mass Budget and Policy Center. There's going to be a website that's indicated later that you can access this as well. This organization does financial analysis of virtually every state program and also tries to integrate federal trends as well. Let's first of all talk about this notion that Massachusetts is a high tax state. Back in 1977, taxes as a percent of personal income And Massachusetts was one of the top-ranked states at 13.8, whereas the U.S. average was 11.4. If you look now, Massachusetts taxes are lower than the U.S. average. We are actually towards the back of the pack.
So the vertical graph, the vertical bar on the far right is Massachusetts now.
That's correct.
And the one on the left is the state, the country average?
The one right in the middle is the U.S. average.
U.S. average, right. Okay, so we are less than...
Which is at 10.9%. We are at 10.3%, so taxes as a percent of personal income. Taxes declined more in Massachusetts than any other state during the period of 1977 to 2008, with the U.S. total, that small tan line in the middle, whereas Massachusetts is at the far right of that graph.
Wow, that's pretty good. That's as a percent of total income.
Correct. And so during that time period, the U.S. average decreased 4%. We decreased 25.2%. This is a trend line from fiscal year 98 through fiscal year 08, showing as a percent of personal income what the expenditures were. And as you can see, that large section on the top, once again, is healthcare.
Yeah, that's
and over that time, spending has more or less stayed constant in terms of our percentages, with slight variations in different fiscal years.
Right.
And this is a trend line showing the percent of total personal income during that time period.
What is this percent of total personal income?
So this is 6.9% in fiscal 98 to 6.6 in terms of the expenditures per person on the state.
Okay.
And this shows the state's own spending has declined during that time period.
Yep.
This next slide just indicates some of those decreases in terms of taxes as a percent of personal income. State tax revenues have declined overall as a percentage of personal income during that time period, from 6.3% of total personal income to 5.3%. Looking at the fiscal year 09 recession, revenue dropped off during that year. We have what's known as a consensus revenue estimate. That allows us to budget for that next fiscal year. During that year, we were called back in 3 different times in order to readjust that revenue estimate and cut programs mid-year. And as you can see, just during that period of time, the consensus revenue developed in July of 2008 was $22.2 billion. By June of 2009, it had dropped over $2 billion. Our projections are still below the FY08 total.
Wow.
How did we fill the gap in the year 2012? Budget cuts and savings, 1.4 billion, which is the large portion of the pie chart. New revenues, about 174 million. And temporary fillers, the stabilization fund, sale of abandoned property, corporate tax breaks, sales of assets, and life science tax expenditure suspensions. When you look at each year from fiscal year 10 to last year, we use different techniques to close the gap every year. So for instance, in the fiscal year 2010, which is on the far left, there were more cuts and savings than the next year, and then it moderated in the following year. All of these stimulus funds have been exhausted, so that federal funds that are located in these first 2 graphs no longer exist. So we don't have that as a solution any longer. This chart shows the trending in Chapter 70 education aid, and as you can see, it's been a 10% decrease since fiscal year 01.
Yeah.
During the last fiscal crisis, we cut state education more than most states. The U.S. average was about 0.8%. We cut 3.7%. This chart just shows that overall local aid trend since fiscal year 01. This is programs on the environment and recreation as a comparison. When we look at ways to raise revenues, we are currently looking at trying to reform our tax code. And what are some of the sort of important points that we're looking at? A tax system should be adequate, stable, simple and efficient, and fair. Most state and local taxes are regressive in terms of the way they treat moderate and low-income taxpayers. The property tax is extremely regressive. The sales tax obviously is. Who pays sales taxes as a percentage of personal income? If you're making less than $63,000 a year, which is the first three of these columns, you're obviously paying much more of a percentage in sales tax than someone who makes more than $200,000 a year.
Yeah.
The income tax, however, is progressive because obviously it's based on how much money you make. Yep. If you look at those folks making under $63,000 a year, as a percentage of personal income, you are paying far less than people making over $200,000 a year. We are currently locked into constitutionally mandated personal income tax cuts based upon the amount of revenue that we collect. The current rate is 5.3%, and actually we just had a percentage cut this year.
What is it down to now, Peter?
I think it's 5.2 and change.
Yeah.
If you'd like to go online and look at some of these slides and more information, Mass Budget and Policy Center, Mass Budget Online, Commonwealth of Mass Budget, all of the Commonwealth's personnel salaries and all of our programs are now totally transparent through the website called Open Checkbook, and that can be accessed through mass.gov, which is this last website. I'm going to roll through just a couple of slides relatively quickly and get to sort of what we're planning on next year.
Yep.
You've already seen sort of where we get money. The personal income tax is, in terms of state and local revenue sources, our largest source of tax revenue. We've already talked a little bit about good tax policy. Capital gains, in the state of Massachusetts right now, because of our experiences with the ups and downs of capital gains numbers, now after we collect $1 billion in capital gains in a particular fiscal year, everything over that amount goes into our stabilization fund. Mm-hmm. We currently have a $1.53 billion stabilization fund. Yeah. We are one of only 3 states that has that. Policy options that we've been looking at the lack of sales taxes on the internet, trying to take the burden off residential property taxpayers, and we're also very extensively looking at the tax expenditure budget, which you can translate as all the tax breaks that are currently on the books. Mm. Right now, if you are buying wholesale boxes, for instance, those are free of the sales tax. Clothing under $125, right, free of the sales tax. Right. If you are Raytheon and you're selling a missile system, anything you sell outside of Massachusetts is free of the sales tax. Oh. So we're currently looking at whether some of these tax breaks make sense right now. Yeah. We have a large number of different tax sort of concepts that we're looking at for the next fiscal year. During this fiscal year, we spent about $30.59 billion through supplemental budgets, adding on to emergency accounts. We were up to $31.1 billion. The governor has proposed a budget of $32.31. Yep. Our calculated house maintenance budget for the year is $32.8 billion, with a current revenue estimate of $13.02 billion, leaving us with a budget shortfall at this point of $790 million. Wow. These are some of the accounts that feed into that analysis. This is a slide that indicates some of the challenges that we are currently facing during this fiscal year. And let me just talk about this just for a minute.
So when will you guys, not to get you off track here, but when will you guys begin to, or are you beginning to address that approximately $1 billion shortfall?
We have had a series of hearings across Massachusetts. We have had a number of caucuses. The budget is being released by the House Ways and Means Committee on April 11th. Mm-hmm. We will begin debate a week after that. We'll finish up by the last week in April. The Senate will wait about a month. Senator Rosenberg and his colleagues will start sometime in late May. Yeah. Those two
Now,
processes.
will they do a separate budget, or
Yes,
will they
yes.
react to the House's recommendation?
They react somewhat, but
Yep.
their document is their own.
Separate, yeah, okay.
The benefit that they will have is this. We're very concerned about the Supreme Court analysis of the federal healthcare law.
Right.
If the individual mandate and that healthcare law is stricken down, that has a negative $400 million impact in the state of Massachusetts.
Right, because we've got obviously individual mandates on our healthcare law at this point.
Our mandate will
Have to
stand.
go- Yeah,
Our mandate will stand.
It will.
But the supplemental income that we derive from that federal healthcare law
Okay, I see
has
what you're
about a
saying.
$400 million
okay. All right.
price tag.
All right, I'm staying
The
corrected.
other issue that we're very concerned about is the failure of the super committee in Congress earlier this year to come up with a multi-year budget resolution in terms of new taxes, tax policy, cuts. That has set in place a series of timed mandatory cuts of discretionary federal programs.
Right.
So the environment, transportation, housing, you name a program. We get about $20 billion a year from the federal government, aside from military spending here, for our programs.
Right.
So it's very difficult for us to really figure out right now.
To include that money in your projections. You've
Exactly
got to have
how
a
much-
couple of different scenarios,
Correct,
obviously.
correct. Exactly what those cuts will be. The Senate will have the luxury of a little bit more time.
Right.
And in fact, we discussed doing a local aid resolution this week, but we want to wait so that we have a little bit more information in terms of what the court's going to do
Right.
and what those sequestered cuts are going to be
Right.
from the feds. We have two other items, the Finch case, which mandates that the state of Massachusetts provide additional health care coverage for legal aliens here in Massachusetts. We also have a funding crisis with the transit system in the metropolitan Boston area. The MBTA
Right,
is in
been
the
reading
hole-
about that.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
The MBTA is in the hole right now about $281 million.
Right.
There are some off-budget trust accounts that we can allocate towards that shortfall. But clearly there's going to have to be a short-term solution for the T and a multi-year solution to our transportation underfunding problem here in Massachusetts. Right now, if just the Western Mass TIP, which is the Transportation Improvement Program going out 5 years for the western part of the state, all the roads, bridges, bike paths, et cetera.
Right.
If we were to try to fund those all at once, it's billions of dollars. We're going to get about $400 million to deal with the entire western part of the state this year. So we have to find a way through some of the techniques that we've used in the past, some cuts, consolidations, reforms, to try to break free some additional dollars for our transportation system.
Yeah.
And,
That's just-
and
right.
there's talk of service cuts in Boston right now, fare increases. Right now, they're looking at a 23% fare increase for the MBTA.
Read that.
There was a hearing here in Western Massachusetts this week where the paratransit rides from the PVTA, they're
right.
talking a substantial increase in those services. Now, if you're an individual
Fixed income.
living on a fixed income, how do you come up with that additional $3 or $4 or $10 to go to the doctors,
Right.
your therapist, to shop? So we have a lot of challenges in terms of that. As I said, we are somewhat fortunate in the fact that we've got $900 million in additional revenue this year.
Yeah.
Jobs in Massachusetts are
Starting
increasing.
increasing,
They're
yeah.
looking good. People are hiring.
Right.
And we've got that stabilization fund.
Right. But you've included those in some of those early calculations.
Parts of them, yes.
Right, parts of them, and you're still ending up with a fairly substantial deficit, at least in some of the early numbers.
It's early in the process. It's going to be a challenging year.
Yeah.
I'm confident that we will reach a point where we will be able to pass a budget. And it's interesting. Massachusetts, by the terms of its constitution, we must balance our budget every year. The federal government doesn't have to. They can print money. They can run $trillion deficits.
Yep.
We don't have that luxury. Every year we pass a balanced budget, which is good for the taxpayers of Massachusetts.
Absolutely, right. It's good for all of us to know that and to do that, and it's good for the country to do that too. And
So
when we can do it.
Right. I'm going to pause the slideshow now, so if you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to talk to you.
Well, yeah, Peter. So what? Let's try to bring this down to the communities you represent and to Hatfield in particular. You know, a substantial amount of the town's revenues obviously are coming from the state in terms of the cherry sheet, or at least what's presented on the cherry sheet. And you, as you had indicated in one of your slides, on a very macro level, state aid to cities and towns over the course of the last 10 years has decreased fairly substantially. And yet, as you commented, be careful because, don't necessarily allude that that's what's happened to Hatfield. We've enjoyed, I guess, over the last several years, probably a stable level of state aid. I think, I'm trying to remember, a couple of years ago we had a certain level, then in 2010 I think it dropped a bit, and then this year it went up a little bit. So how is it that, and maybe you don't have the answer to this right away, how is it that Hatfield's state aid level has not seen the negative hit that overall state aid has taken?
I think when you look at different communities, different parts of Massachusetts, the composition of state aid as a part of their total annual needs, Lawrence is very different than a Hatfield.
All right. Is it a formula issue?
It is a formula, and quite frankly, the formula has been relatively stagnant and in one place for many years now.
Yeah.
But the overall picture, I think, for Hatfield is that jobs are increasing. We've enabled communities to do some very positive things financially in terms of shifting municipal health care to the state system. Mm-hmm. That alone this year, as I mentioned, will save $100 million. That can be used towards local aid.
Right.
We can backfill that. We've allowed a local options meals tax, which many communities have embraced.
Have adopted. Right.
Northampton, this year, they're going to raise somewhere in the range of $900,000 just on that meals tax increase.
Yeah.
As I said, jobs are increasing, employment's looking good. People are hiring. Right. One of our big challenges is banks, local banks, big banks are sitting on a ton of cash. Corporations are sitting on a ton of cash. Yep. The treasurer is doing something really innovative right now, in that he is taking state funds, putting it in local banks, who then promise to offer that capital to local businesses who want to expand.
Right.
And I think that's a real positive thing for Massachusetts, and he's going to be expanding it out here in the western part of the state as well. Right. But overall, I think things are looking up. Yep. Revenues are up.
Yeah.
The big question mark is what's going to happen in Washington, because if you talk to Congressman Neal, Congressman Oliver, and those folks, it's never been more bitter down there. And trying to get anything done. Right. Just this past week, they were unable to come to a resolution on transportation. They're just going to continue it for next year. We'd like to know what we're going to get next year.
Right.
So that caustic Washington atmosphere is in great contrast to the
what's going on in Western Massachusetts,
that I've explained,
that's for sure.
Which we try to work in a nonpartisan way to solve problems, and we've been very successful at it.
Right.
And I think I'm very optimistic moving forward that we're going to keep growing and keep doing.
So if I'm not, but if I'm on the Hatfield Finance Committee, and at this point the Finance Committee in the town is starting to put together its 2013 fiscal budget, and obviously we're trying to anticipate what state aid might be. We can see the trends. We see what it was last year, but there are two issues, I guess. One is the approximate amount, and timing, I guess, is the other issue, because you've mentioned that it may take a little while longer for that decision to be made at the state level, because you guys are waiting to see what's going on in Washington. Right. You're waiting to see what's going on at the Supreme Court. There are a whole bunch of things that could impact this, but what?
Three positive things towards those individuals that are wrestling with that right now. First thing is, on Wednesday of this week, we passed a Chapter 90 bill of $200 million. Now that's up from about $150 a couple of years ago. Good, so $200 million.
Our roads and bridges in town could really use that.
So you've got $200 million that you know about, and in the actual formula, the actual amount that Hatfield will get is set in stone already. Okay. So Hatfield knows right now what they're going to get.
90s. Right. Yep. Okay.
Number two, you will know.
Now, when you say Hatfield knows, has Hatfield been told, or is that number available?
Well, I don't think that they've been formally notified yet, because the Senate has not passed that bill yet. Okay. So once the Senate and the House pass it, once it's signed, they'll send out an actual form and a letter. Okay. Hatfield actually gets a letter from the Commonwealth that explains how much.
Right.
So that $200 million is there.
Yep. Good.
By the end of April, you will have a local aid number from the House.
Okay.
So at the very least, you'll have a number.
From the house anyway.
You'll have a number, and you can actually start to do your budget based on that house number.
Yeah.
Because that will probably be, if anything, lower than the number from the Senate.
Yeah.
And, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So that'll happen in April.
Yeah.
So those two facts will be there. The third thing, which is not going to happen this year, which happened last year, was, remember last year, the legislature and the governor withheld $65 million in local aid, not knowing how much we would have at the end of the year.
Right.
Then we came back in the supplemental budget in October and restored that to all the towns.
Yeah.
We're not going to do that this year. We're going to make sure that that money is there up front, and that was explained to us in the House caucus this week.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Good.
they can be confident about those three things, which I think enables them to move forward.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, I think that's helpful for people in town that are watching, and anyone who's on the finance committee and or the finance team in town, if you will, which consists of the finance committee and selectmen and a few other key people. Well, this has been, incredibly interesting to hear what's, the challenges at the state level and all the pieces of the puzzle, and both from the income side and the expense side. And Peter, we wish you guys well in trying to deal with that fiscal issue, to try to somehow come up with another $750 million to $1 billion of deficit. The solution to that, I'm sure, is going to be a challenge.
Well, and I think
all of the continuing demands of infrastructure and health care and education and local aid and everything else. And you've been, as you pointed out, within the last 5 years particularly, you've been very creative, and you've used, you've made cuts, and you've consolidated, and those are still options, but you can only go so far, and it's difficult at times to get blood out of a stone.
Right, and I think one more positive thing is we have an important player on our team back. Stan Rosenberg is back. He went to his first function yesterday. I was with him. Good. He looks great. He's feeling great. He's back on our team. He's the number 2 person in the Senate. Yeah. The vice chairman of Ways and Means on the House side is Steve Kulik from Worthington. The chairman of Ways and Means on the Senate side is from Barry, Steve Brewer. So we have a lot of very powerful, well-informed legislators trying to make Western Mass successful. And when you talk about things that are particularly important here in terms of local aid, pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. Many towns out here have large amounts of property that the Commonwealth owns. Right. Very important item in local aid. Regional school transportation. We have a lot of regional schools out here. Yeah, that's true. It's a very important funding amount on local aid. Those folks are huge advocates of those accounts. Yeah. So having them all working together, I think that's very good for the western part of the state.
That's good. I guess at this point, given the headlines in local papers as well as in Boston, I would be remiss not to ask you about this. And I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be, but there has been this ongoing probe, I guess, and now there's been some legal action that's happened with the investigation of the state probation department. And I was just wondering if you had any comment at all on that. And it's not to put you on the spot at all, but I mean it's obviously pretty public at this point. And
I think my experience, and this is based on many years of working in Boston. I was the former chief of staff of the House Post Audit Committee. I worked with a lot of law enforcement agencies doing investigations on the Big Dig and UMass and Mass Highway. My view is that 99.9% of the people who work for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are hard-working, honest people. They do great things every day. And I think it's unfortunate that we have headlines that sometimes lead people to believe that might not be true. Right. I mean, I'm not going to comment on any...
Sour that generic impression, if you will.
And I'm not going to comment on any individuals. Obviously there's an ongoing criminal investigation, but when you look back at some of the comments I've made today in terms of what Fitch's, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's have said about how the Commonwealth of Massachusetts responded to this crisis, we stand heads above almost every other state in terms of how we've come out of this crisis, and that's a testament not only to the people of Massachusetts, but the employees and legislators and governor that had to really put pen to paper and write laws and make choices to make us more successful than these other states. And I'm optimistic. Things are looking up, and I'm very happy to be working.
What are you hearing? Are you hearing anything about the casinos, Western Mass?
One of the best things we did early on in that process was we took the legislature totally out of the process of citing a casino. And I think if you look at other states that did not do that, that's where you saw indictments and law enforcement coming in. In this state, no legislator has anything to do with citing a casino. And I think if you look at the 5 members who were appointed to that commission,
the commission,
the appointee from Western Massachusetts, Bruce Stebbins, is an outstanding public servant. He's worked for many Republican administrations. I know him very well. He's an honest, hardworking guy. He's going to do a great job.
It's good to have that representation there, that's for sure. Well, I think that's about all the time we've got for today's installment of Hatfield Currents. We want to thank Peter Kocot, Representative Peter Kocot, for being here and for a very interesting and informative show. Peter, do you have any other last thoughts you want to share with people who are watching?
I'm looking forward to spring, to planting my tomatoes and my peppers, and I'm going to try some eggplants this year. And I'm looking forward to bringing big crates of Swarovski strawberries down to Boston in May. And I'm happy to live out here and represent Hatfield because it's God's place on earth. And
you'd be driving to Boston in a van come June, July, I guess.
I have a big SUV, and literally I can't put enough corn in that SUV to satisfy the people down at the State House, which is a good thing.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We want to thank those of you who are watching from home for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope you know a little bit more about Representative Peter Kocot personally and professionally, and what he's doing for us in the Great and General Court in Boston. And we also think, given his slide presentation and our discussion, that you probably know a little bit more about the state's current financial fiscal situation and possible impacts on Hatfield. Just a reminder, we continue to look for topics and guests for Hatfield Currents. So if you're interested, feel free to email us at hatfieldcurrents@gmail.com, or you can contact the Cable Advisory Committee at hctv@townofhatfield.org. Before I sign off, I do want to thank the Hatfield Currents production team for all their help. Do you want to say something?
I was just going to add, if you wish to contact me, there's one last slide. If you have any comments on today's program or want to add any suggestions or comments, you can contact me locally at my local number, 582-6111, in Boston at the State House at 617-722-2140, at my website. And if you're ever in Boston and want to pop in, room 23 at the State House, and if we're in session, I'll take you down onto the House floor and I'll introduce you.
There you go. So you got an open invitation for a tour of the State House by our local representative, Peter Kocot. That's wonderful, actually. Thank you for doing that. I'm sure people will look you up.
That's fine.
Somebody will take advantage of it for sure. Let's see, one last reminder. Hatfield's annual town meeting this year is Tuesday evening, May 8th at 7 p.m. And annual voting is the following Tuesday on May 15th. So we hope to have a show on the town meeting's warrant articles to be broadcast a couple of days just prior to the town meeting. And also we'll hope to have a Hatfield Currents candidate show to be broadcast the week prior to Election Day. So be sure to watch both shows to help you know what and who to vote for this coming year. Again, thanks, Peter, for joining us. Thanks for watching Hatfield Currents. We hope you enjoyed it. For Hatfield Currents, I'm Mike Cahill. Watch yourself, Hatfield.